Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome back to the former Farm Kid channel. Today we're talking about the removal and reinstallation of the flywheel on the John Deere 730 diesel. This also applies to the 720 diesel from serial number 7214900, inclusive and on. So basically, the genesis of this whole ordeal is the fact that my flywheel here is a taper lock flywheel, and it started falling off. So instead of just smacking it back on and hoping for the best, I decided to take it off and have a good look at it. So since I had done that, I decided that anything I could get to along the drivetrain here, really the crankshaft, that I was going to go ahead and change out. So the parts I have renewed, which I consider to be consumables, would be the seal and washer on, it's called the thrust plate, and the oil cleaner housing. Sometimes it's just referred to as a plain housing. The gasket that goes onto this housing. There is an O-ring inside the oil cleaner itself. This piece of metal right here, and I'm going to show you the actual pieces here in a second. And most importantly, this thrust washer. All these things are easily gotten to once the flywheel comes off. I would have loved to replace the other thrust washer, which is on the end of the crankshaft, but to do that, I would have had to take this whole housing case off, and that is no small ordeal. So here are what the parts look like. This is the oil cleaner housing, also referred to as the thrust plate. And this is what the inside of it looks like. This is the gasket. Its number is R20232, and it goes around the outer rim of the thrust plate. It is a special gasket. It needs to have this cutout here for this oil piece, oil sump right here. What sits inside of here is this fibrous washer. Goes in first. This is what came out of mine, by the way. This is why it's a good idea to replace these consumables. As you can see, there's a big chunk of it missing. Chances are that's down right next to the oil screen. So it looks so perfect that I thought perhaps it was made like a horseshoe, but in fact it's not. I shouldn't really call it a backer washer. It's just a fibrous washer that fills the space in here, because this seal then that actually came out, and here's the number, it's AF2426R. This is your typical normal seal, and it sits down to this lip right here on the housing, and then behind it is where this fibrous washer sits. What goes on prior to that is the actual oil cleaner. It's also called a spacer in the schematic. John Deere refers to both of them, or refers to it with both of those names. Inside of it, in this gap here, is this washer slash, they do call it a seal in the schematic, and the number is A4224R for it. It's called a cleaner because if you look closely on the back here, this groove picks up oil at the base and slings it out. So when you remove this, you want to take a really good look that this groove right here is free and clear, because that's where the oil is actually traveling. What goes up next against this is the all very important thrust washer. Here's the old one I took out. Maybe hard to see on camera here, but it is full of pits. The facing has really wore off, and it's really in bad shape. This could actually be the original, even though this tractor I have, that I've only had about a month, has a top-end overhaul, which means they should have, hopefully did, put new bearings on the crank. But looking at this, it appears perhaps that they did not. The backside is pitted almost just as bad. You can see these spaces right here. And not only that, it's the wrong thrust washer. As you can see, the new one has this tab right here, and even the schematic shows this. So this is definitely the wrong washer. Here is the new thrust washer. Again, it's not metal. It's fibrous. That thrust washer from John Deere, $57.21. So for less than about 150 bucks, able to replace all these consumables, is what I call them, on the end of the crankshaft prior to reinstalling the crankshaft, or the flywheel rather. So I will try to shoot some video as I put this all back together onto the end of the crankshaft, and then part 2 of this video will be the actual flywheel installation. Okay guys, so here's what we have. We have the housing and the sleener and the seals inside all put back together. John Deere says you need 3/1000 clearance between the sleener and the housing. That's this gap right here, and it pretty much centered right onto that all the way around, so that wasn't an issue. The toughest part about putting the housing back on is because you have a new seal on this, and you also have that fiber backer washer to it as well. The seal pretty much not too tough going over the sleener. What became impossible to do just by force of hand was getting that fiber washer to go over this. It's a little over thick, so it's nice and tight on the shaft. So what I ended up having to do is push it on as far as I could, and then I put 3 bolts into it and use those as a press and just evenly tighten 3 of them down. You can use all 5 if you want, but I just went back and forth between this one and these 2, and it did then slip over. It's a good idea to go ahead and oil it up really well so that it's very slippery. I mean, it's designed to absorb oil. I think part of its function is to keep oil onto the seal as well. There's another oil port down here that supplies oil for the sleener, or either evacuates the sleener. It's sort of unclear as to how that operates. And then once you get it back over, you have to take this off again, because the first time you put it on, John Deere says put it on without the gasket. And what I think that does is seat the sleener on the crankshaft, pushes it on a little bit extra. So see that tiny little gap right here, how I can't move that up? That's to make sure there's a slight gap between the sleener and it would be the It's hard to say what that would be next to this or the seal. Probably it wouldn't be the seal, it would probably be this. And then you have to take this back off. So not only is it difficult once to put this on, it's difficult twice. So after discovering the first time how to do it using the bolts as a press, I took it back off, put the gasket on, and I actually stuck the gasket to the case, lining up the holes. Otherwise, if you try to stick it to this, it's probably going to be okay, but with it on the case and no bolts in whatsoever, it's totally undisturbed. So then you have to put it back on a second time with the gasket on, and now that creates that little bit of gap, that little tiny gap, and then go ahead and torque all the bolts down. And frankly, I had to go around this almost, I'm going to say 5 times. They just kept tightening up, tightening up, tightening up, and finally they hit bottom. So the next activity is going to be putting the collet on, and as I might have mentioned previously, you can see my square here, and this gap needs to line up with that square because I'm going to mount the flywheel with the key in the up position on this part right here. This is the drive pin for the oil cylinder to make sure that it stays spinning with the crankshaft. Would it spin without it? It does, because the O-ring and the fiber washer is so tight on the crankshaft that it pretty much stays with it, but there's no guarantee. So as this goes on, you can see that those two here and here need to line up. If you're a little bit off, can you then move this? Well, it's not spline to here, but it is a very difficult move. So you want to get this in as perfect position as you possibly can. It appears that I may be a little out of position. I may have to actually tap that a little bit. I'm going to wait and see until I start driving this on. As it turns, we'll see how it turns out. So, as you can see, this is a very precise fit. Matter of fact, I did have to take my brass drift and move it just like a millimeter, and now it's perfectly lined up. It did move fairly easily. So, in case I forget to mention, here is the timing mark on the crankshaft, the V, and that must line up with this little divot in the collet. And as you can see, this is still going to hang over a little bit from the crankshaft by the time it gets closed up at the end here, because I've only got about 1/4 of an inch to go, and I'm going to try to set the end play here today maybe. So that's what we have so far. Also, John Deere says that anytime you are pushing on the crankshaft, you need to support the crankshaft from moving back and forth by what they call bucking the end. Basically, it's just supporting. So you're just applying a little bit of pressure so the crankshaft cannot give and slap back on the thrust washer. Just putting the jack to the tire is problematic, and this tire will give a little bit. So when you're pushing on that crankshaft, and I'm eventually going to have to bang on it to get the collet on, that tire will give, and it keeps giving and then shocking back on the rebound from the tire. So this chain keeps this good and solid, will not give. It just is happened to be pinned to the tire, but the chain right now is keeping tension on it, and it's just light tension. And of course, you need a jack that can jack sideways. This is a Pittsburgh jack, and let me tell you, they're designed to be able to jack sideways, so it works very well. Give a look-see here at the taper lock flywheel. As you can see, there is no place on here to mount a puller. So to get this thing off, it's kind of nice when it starts falling off, because then it's just a matter of giving a little bit more pull. But basically, you just have to go in behind it and keep prying each side, top, bottom, side, until it slides off. It's made by a guy named Allen, and his initials are actually in it. AMW, Allen Machine Works. It's Jonesboro, Tennessee. The part number on this is F3570R. So what I've got set up here right now is what I hope is the best procedure to set the end play, since, as we can see, this gap here, this rust spot, that flywheel has never gone on farther than that. Should it have? I don't know. But even if it goes on a little bit farther, the end play is still going to be set by the collet to the slingers. So what I've done is drive the collet all the way on, so there should right now be 0 end play. And then what I'm going to do is go through the procedure, and John Deere says just engage the clutch, disengage it, engage it, disengage it. And then on the dial indicator, watch what it does here. So obviously I'm going to need greater end play here. So what I will do is, instead of trying to tap it on to the correct end play, I'm going to use my puller, which I can more infinitely control. And I will just give it a little turn, re-engage the clutch, check the end play. If I need a little bit more, just give it a little bit more tension here, because with a nut on, I can do fine tuning as far as pulling this back out to get the correct end play, versus trying to tap it on and get the correct end play. So I am going to need to set my dial indicator up, and I'm going to see where is best. Hopefully I can get it on here, but we'll see. I've got to set that up yet. So the book calls for 5 to 10 thousandths of end play. So right there is 6,000. And let's see if I can set this bevel to 0 so I can watch the needle move. There's 0. And now I'm going to go up and exercise the clutch, and we should see it come back to 0. There is engaged. So it comes back where you would exactly expect it to, and then letting off, it goes back to wherever that's at. What is that, about 7 or so? So that's basically what you want to see. As you engage the clutch, you're pressing back on the crankshaft, and it should go to 0 because that's its starting place. Starting point there, the clutch is engaged. Back to 0. Back off. Yeah, I could use a hair more, but that's pretty close.